Listen up.
Welcome to the PowerShell Podcast, the podcast for PowerShell and the PowerShell community. And now, here's your host, Andrew Plaw.
Welcome to another episode of the PowerShell Podcast, your weekly podcast for PowerShell and all things automation, DevOps, security, and more. And we have a very special guest. Fresh off of a PowerShell Wednesday presentation about runtime containers, we are joined by six-time, I think, Microsoft MVP, huge open source contributor, a lot of amazing, fast modules that we'll cover here shortly. But Justin, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and we were just talking. We got something coming up next month, June, I think 23rd to the 26th or something like that. We're going to be at PowerShell Conference Europe. I just recently announced. Oh yeah, I thought you were coughing for a second there. I was like, "Where's the cough?"
I'm holding up my swag. I'm holding my street cred here.
Yes.
PSConf EU in Malmo, Sweden this year. Very much looking forward to it. One of my favorite times of the year. I get to go to Europe. I get to spend a bunch of time with a lot of very fun PowerShell people. I get to take my partner and traipse around Europe for the week before to get over the jet lag. Yeah, it's always a good time.
Wow. So you're going to be there a week before.
Yeah, so every year when we go, so it's been Vienna, then Prague, then Antwerp. Usually we go a week before, and then we're the kind of traveling people who we just pack a backpack and go, and we only book the first hotel and the first flight, and then just wherever we end up. So like one year we started in England, went to Ireland, ended up in Hungary, and then ended up back. Another year we went through one of the great PowerShell community members, Matthias, went to his hometown in Denmark and transferred through Antwerp and Berlin and took the train down to Prague, and that was all a great time. And then last year we went through Lisbon and Portugal and middle Portugal and a couple other spots before ending up in Antwerp. And so it's always a really good time. It's always a nice time for both of us and get to spend a lot of time talking about PowerShell stuff. So
nice. What are you most excited for at PowerShell Conference Europe? Is it the tourism the week before? Is it the sessions? Is it the people?
It's always, there's just something really great about, I have this great group of friends who I get to see sometimes here, sometimes at Summit, but there's a group of friends that I just tend to not see only about once a year, even though we interact online, and in text messages all the time. And just getting to be around people who are like me. Like I'll never forget the first conference that I ever went, and I took my partner who's known me like 10 years and has always dealt with my eccentricities as most partners do, but then we got there, and within like 10 minutes of hanging out with the people there, I remember her looking at me and just saying, "It's like, now I know why you are the way you are, is because these people are exactly like you." So because we all come from, PowerShell attracts people from a very similar background. They tend to have been system administrators. They tend to think a bit differently. They tend not to just be the click next to give me my paycheck types. And so our personalities tend to fall into very similar categories. And so going over there, as well as going to the events in Seattle, it's just fast friends, immediate friends. And some I would consider a lot of them, the closest friends that I have, even though they're half a globe away.
That's what's so special about it, is that just instantly being able to connect with people who get you. You don't have to add a bunch of context over this or that. You can just connect. And like you said, you develop relationships that you have year over year, and you see people grow in their journeys and you help each other out. And it is so special to me that you can also have this professional success alongside this great, finding your community, finding a place where you belong is such a core human thing. And the fact that we have this wonderful, accepting community that we can be part of and thrive in it's hard to put it into words until you experience it. So if you're in Europe, check out PS Conference EU. If you're in the States, check out PowerShell Summit. If you can't travel like that, try and find a local user group. Join PowerShell Wednesdays. Join the RTP SUG, Pacific PowerShell user group. There's so many ways that you can start finding your people, and there are many of them out there. But you have some talks, right? Are you giving some talks at PowerShell Conference Europe?
I am, yes. I am a speaker again this year. I have a sort of recurring talk now on what's called optimizing VS Code for PowerShell. If you Google it, I'm sure you'll find it. And the previous iterations. This one's going to be a little bit longer one. Typically, they tend to be 50-minute ones. This one's going to be a full 90 minutes. And it's more or less going to be it's going to be a supercut, more or less, of a lot of the past things, what's changed. And, because VS Code is one of the fastest moving software products that exists. And A lot has changed in the last 4 years. And so stuff that I've said in those first ones are now out of date. And so it's time for a refresh and refresh my settings file, my 1,000-line settings file, and go through those and why I have those settings, and just basically get people up to date with what works for me in VS Code, both in and out of PowerShell, but primarily focused on PowerShell. And a really exciting thing for me this year is that I've always made it a rule that everything that I show in my demos is free, that you can get it. You don't have to pay for it. It's free. Like, it's zero barrier of cost. And now that GitHub Copilot has a free tier, I can now finally start talking about GitHub Copilot in that presentation, which is not going to be the focus of the presentation, but I am going to show off some things that are just amazing and have been just transformative in my thing. Like, as the people who know me, is that I am very cynical and centrist on AI, and I even, every time I say the word AI, I hate it because it's ML, it's not AI, but and it's LLMs. But that being said, it is the word that is used now, and it's just I've lost that fight. But there's real value and real utility be there. Like, people are not just throwing billions of dollars into it as like a speculation cryptocurrency. There is real value be had there, and there are transformative changes. And it has transformed the way that I do my programming and the way that I do my modules. And it has saved me so much time, to the point that it made a module that I use. I spent all this time making this module to doing type formats and for PowerShell, because doing type formats in PowerShell requires this XML format that's really difficult to work with because of the way it's disjointed and such like that. And so I made a really easy module to work with that. And I spent all this time making it, and I don't think I've used it once, because I just ask Copilot to do it for me, and it does it perfectly. And I ask it to adjust things, and it moves things where they would be, and it gets things done in seconds accurately that would take me an hour. And so it's stuff like that that I'm really looking forward to showing off, but as well as just in general ways to just use VS Code in general to really supercharge your efficiency in writing PowerShell and just make your life easier.
Boom. Powerful. Now, you mentioned VS Code. What do you see people struggle with? New people to VS Code, they're maybe newer to PowerShell as well. What are some of the hurdles that you see them run into early on?
I mean, I think they run into the same hurdles that I run into. God, has it been almost a decade? No, it hasn't been a decade, but pretty close to, as long as I remember when I first started using VS Code. I'm going to say it was probably 2018, I want to guess. Somewhere early on there, between 2016 and 2018. And like, I was used to PowerShell. I was used to PowerShell ISE, all reliable, as we all have been who came up in that time. I played a little bit with Sapien PowerShell Studio, which is a great product, but I just didn't do a lot of GUI type stuff, so it didn't have as much value to me as it does for other people. And I just saw this ecosystem. I was starting to dabble in other things, but I didn't really want to learn all of Visual Studio or a tool like JetBrains, which are all great tools, but it's like, it was a lot of mental cognitive load to take on and train these things that I might use occasionally. And I saw the promise of this new thing called VS Code. I was like, oh, this thing like is basically just a text. They're making no pretense that it's a text editor, first and foremost. It's just a really good text editor. And it's been designed with that in mind. And everything serves that ultimate goal of editing text, whatever that means. And the way that has expanded, for me, really getting into that was real rough. I mean, first using Visual Studio was very aggravating. I had the shortcuts I was used to. I had the things I was used to. And it was really painful to do it. And like, I was so much slower doing things in Visual Studio Visual Studio Code than I was doing them in ISE. And, and then that was even then with the early versions of the extension. So it wasn't even an order of magnitude worse than somebody getting started today would have to deal with. And there's no documentation. There's wonderfully helpful people in the repo, but otherwise, it was the Wild West in early adopter land. And I see people struggle with the same thing. It's just the aspect that you have this new thing that you have to learn. And while it is a text editor, it's not Notepad, it's not ISE. It's fairly friendly to get started in terms of you have a window and you have a few buttons here and you don't have to know what all those buttons do. But once you start clicking those buttons, there's a lot behind those buttons. And then it starts looking really intimidating. And I think that it's that thing, is that overwhelming aspect of that, because it can do all these things and because it is so powerful and because there's millions of extensions. I think there's millions now of extensions. Probably not. There's probably like hundreds of thousands or something. But there's a lot. There's a lot of extensions that it's you just sometimes you don't know where to start, or you feel this intrinsic worthlessness that like, I'll never learn all of this, therefore I won't be an expert, therefore why should I even bother? And I feel like, I mean, that happens to me on a lot of things, not just PowerShell. And so what it comes down to is you just have to take from it what you get from it. If you use VS Code and you never change the default layout, you only have 4 settings in your settings.json, and that works for you, great. Absolutely. Like if it's making you better, if it doesn't work for you and you're still on Notepad, you just want to write it in Notepad because you're a purist and like you feel I remember there was a time when like Linus Torvalds talked about how syntax highlighting like got in the way of things. And so it's like for some people, yes. And if that's how you work, that's great. But if you're just getting started, there can be advantages to going those directions. And like, I can't live without, if I had to code in Notepad, I would probably be 1/100th as efficient as I am now. So I think it really just comes down to is just start with taking what you can get from it. Go with those little wins, try the things that you like, and then learn little tips and tricks along the way. The VS Code repository is great. I hope my presentations on optimizing Visual Studio Code for PowerShell help people to just kind of get an idea of a bunch of the little different things you can do. And then just go from there. Read the release notes. The release notes are very AI heavy these days, but even if you go back in the old release notes, the release notes are an excellent source of just little tips and tricks. It's like, hey, we added this thing. Here's the shortcut to do it. Usually there's a little animated GIF included. And like, so 90% of the stuff that I do in my presentations come from those release notes. I'm just like, I see something and they're like, oh, that's cool. Let me go play with it. And there's stuff like, God, what was the thing? Oh, my favorite, I'll do a little mini tease for it. My favorite thing that I learned in VS Code this year was something that was added to VS Code like 3 years ago. In VS Code, for the terminal at the bottom, normally you have like the terminal and then you have your 2 bars on the side and the terminal kind of gets squished between them. You can do this as a setting, but you can also just right click the top bar that says like output terminal, etc. And you'll have an option for align. And if you choose alignment justified, the terminal now fills the entire width of your screen. And those little sidebars, the activity bar and the side activity bar, now sit above it. So now your terminal is always full width of your screen. So especially if you're using like an ultra wide monitor, now I have all this space for my terminal that doesn't get squished and resized and moved by those side windows. And I can also like do multiple panes and that kind of thing. Absolute game changer. I had no idea that it existed until somebody did the VS Code official channel. They were like, hey, did you know you could do this? And I was like, I'm in this thing all day, every day. Everybody looks at me as the guru of PowerShell. I had no idea. So there's always something to learn. There's always stuff being added and always ways to make yourself a little bit more efficient. So that's my biggest thing is that just pick up little things at a time as you go, just like you learn in PowerShell. You learn the basic syntax, maybe play with a module, maybe play with another module. Then you start thinking about how those can come together. And before you know it, now you have this knowledge base that you can share with other people about VS Code and being productive. So.
Yeah, I think earlier we were talking to somebody about how, they wish they could play video games without min-maxing it. And I feel like that is sort of what happened to me whenever I got into VS Code. It's like, oh, there's this new thing. How do I configure it properly and all this stuff? And it becomes very overwhelming and daunting. But you do have to just find that way to get started, find the way you can get value out of it quickly without having to learn everything. And I think a similar concept applies to learning Git. You could fully learn it, but you could also kind of get started, get it installed, and start using it to keep yourself up to date without understanding every single command in the whole Git library, I guess.
Ecosystem or however you want to call it.
Yeah.
Like with Git, I mean, the main commands I know git branch, git checkout, git merge rebase -i, and then all the ones that I use to deal with conflicts and such, or like redoing actions, like it's like git commit -a -no edit -amend, and then force push, which I just have as an alias now I call it CI commit. That means erase whatever I just did, force push it back to the branch. I don't want to see this terrible, stupid mistake of me trying to fix this GitHub action 500 times in the history. Just keep overwriting that last commit until it works. So like stuff like that. Like I know all these little tips and tricks here, like that kind of thing. But as far as the vast majority of how Git works, I'm definitely not a Git command line expert. Most of what I do is using the Git graph v3 extension in VS Code, as well as the built-in VS Code source control. And VS Code now has a nice new graph view, which I'll of course cover in my presentation. But yeah, like again, to that point, you don't have to know it all. I don't know it all. I have a pretty good understanding of the concepts behind it. And Git was terrifying. I'll never forget the first time I checked out a branch and then reverted to my other branch. And because I was always looking at the file explorer view and I was doing it at the command line, and then watched my changes disappear. And I was like, oh no, what? No, come back. And then I realized it was so hard to get my head around these logical concepts that, yeah, I mean, sure, under the hood, it's just taking those and putting them in this little folder and then moving them around and doing all kinds of cool stuff on the file system. But thinking of it more conceptually as like these different layers and slides. It's just like I'm like writing up. If you're doing an animation, you're like writing on top like sketch paper. Now you're moving that paper out of the way so you can go back to the original one, and then bringing a paper over here and then putting another paper on top. Like that's how I personally visualize it when I'm doing it. Even though I know that's not what's actually happening, it helps me visualize what's happening, and it makes it easier for me to conceptually work with it, even if it's not like the letter of the law truth of what's happening. So yeah, I totally understand that aspect.
And I'll give a shout out to dangitgit.com. There's also, It's also called Git, but dang it, Git. We don't have to bleep that one. Mm-hmm. If you do get lost in Git land and you need to do things, it gives you a starting point to like recover or squash or whatever you need to do. But once you have these, like once you are able to add these things to your tool belt, you chip away at them, you understand them because they're not actually that complicated once you actually start typing things and interacting, following like a basic guide. Well, the tool set you have is incredible, right? Like the tools we have now, you said VS Code, I think it was 2018, at least whenever I started using it was about the same time. These are incredibly powerful tools. And not only that, I think some of the stuff you talked about in your PowerShell Wednesday talk, dev containers, right? There's a lot you can do, and the tooling is so wild what you can do from a web browser. Do you want to tease a little bit about what you talked about?
Yeah, so there's sort of two aspects of development. There's the tools that you use and the environment that you develop in. And so for most of us, that's the desktop, that's our computer, whatever computer we're running on, we got a folder, we open it, and that's where we work in. And so some people may not know, but I think most people who have ever gotten to the point of dabbling with a work project or an open source project, or you need to contribute to something, or somebody had a script that you need to work on. And so you take this thing, you try to run it for the first time and it doesn't work. And it turns out after spending an hour, you realize, oh, I need the AZ module. And then you install the latest AZ module and it doesn't work. And you go, oh, this script has a bug in it where it actually needs AZ 2.25.1 and it doesn't work on any version after that. Okay, and then you install that. And then you run it again and then it doesn't work. And you're like, oh, this script actually uses a certain command line tool that's only available on Ubuntu 20, and they got rid of it in version 24. So you spend all that time just getting to a place of being able to contribute, if you even get that far, if you don't rage quit first. And so what would be nice is that if we had some way to sort of have that environment pre-ready for you. Like what if we could establish a stable environment that doesn't change? And so that you can be in there doing what you need to do, but have it ready to go for developers. This has always been kind of a holy development grail. People used to try to do it with like imaging a workstation and then like re-imaging the dev box and making that work. Some people started doing it with virtual machines and having that. But containers are really where it really became possible to make this really fast. Like all those were possible and they were cool when they happened. But containers really kickstarted the ability to really make this go, because containers, because they're so lightweight compared to those other options, even as relatively lightweight as virtual machines are compared to wiping a box and running the Windows install. Containers are so lightweight that they can just be thrown away and brought back almost in an instant. And so what dev containers are is it's literally just a sort of a specification that everybody has agreed on, what's called the Cloud Native Foundation. It's just a specification that says, if you write a JSON file like this, and it includes these certain things in there, then these are sort of the building blocks and blueprints to build a dev container. So you start with a container, which has its own way of building a container. It's concepts of layers and things where you basically start with a base operating system of something, and then you do the steps like you would do like you had a fresh version of Windows or a fresh version of Linux. And you say, all right, well, I want to update all the packages, and then I want to install my version of .NET that I need, and I want to install that particular version of the AZ module that I need, and make sure that no others are there, that kind of thing. And then once I have all that, take a snapshot of it, and then that's where I want. So that's sort of the process of building a container, whether it's a Docker container or what's known as an OCI container, which is basically just the standard version of a Docker container. Docker has become one of those colloquial words like Google and Kleenex, which is what we refer to with containers when we say Docker containers. But Docker was just sort of the first company that was really pioneering that stuff. But containers actually now use an open standard called OCI. So we tend to more and more say OCI containers. And this is what is sort of the standard that you still can use Docker to make them. And there's not a huge distinction between them. You still can use Docker files to edit them. Just Docker was really, really good with their branding. Shout out to their marketing team. to get the word Docker plastered all across the container ecosystem, that it's going to take a little while to wind that back. So that's just sort of a way of saying is that we can now build these isolated environments, and they were great for running applications. That was the first thing that we're done with them. So whenever you hear about Kubernetes, that's just a way of running containers. It's an orchestration engine to run containers, turn them on, turn them off, schedule them, scale them up, build more if we get more demand, all that kind of stuff. But in the end, it's just running containers in the same way like VMware runs virtual machines or Hyper-V runs virtual machines. It's just that orchestration platform. And it's not the only one. It's just the most popular one. And so, but then we realized like, okay, well, we're developing these applications, but now what I'm doing on my local machine is different from what's on the remote machine. And so, building a container, if anybody's ever worked with GitHub Actions, you know this, or Azure DevOps, you know this feeling where maybe you're doing it on Windows, but your thing runs on Linux. So it works just fine on your local machine. But then when you go to do it in the GitHub Actions, maybe you forgot to capitalize something, and it's not case sensitive on Windows, but it is case sensitive on Linux. And that frustration of having to retry all the time. So dev containers help solve that. There's a great, there's a wonderful GIF that's my favorite, one of my favorite GIFs. It's from a movie. It's basically just Johnny Depp and this little kid on a bench, and this little kid is crying, and the kid is crying. He says, "It works on my machine," and Johnny Depp just looks at him very, very lovingly and says, "Then we will ship your machine." And that was how Docker was born. And that's my favorite, because it illustrates it perfectly. Is the idea that a Docker container is nothing but what you put in it. So if you build it the way, and even better, if you develop in it and it works on your machine, well, then you just Docker build that thing, and now you ship your machine. It might not be the greatest way to do it, but hey, at least it works. But the point being is that you can have your development environment without having to build a whole separate computer or even a whole separate virtual machine. You can have a development environment that mirrors your runtime environment, because you develop in a container and then you run in a container. And that's great. And if you use GitHub Actions, you're pretty much running in containers all the time. Technically, you're running on a virtual machine by default, but you have the ability to create tasks in GitHub Actions that run in containers, and make sure all your dependencies and such come along. So I was just going to wrap up here. Sorry. Yeah. So with dev containers, the main thing there is just it gives you this ability to develop as if, and all you see is VS Code. You have your VS Code and you edit just like you did, but the environment in which you develop can be standardized and isolated and portable, such that everybody can develop the same way, and it just makes development better, in my opinion.
So in the runtime and runtime containers, I hear you said dev containers, runtime containers. What is the difference? And I know Docker is a container that is kind of a branded version. Can you help me understand?
So container is sort of the overreaching word, and a container is, as I always like to say, things are glorified this and that. A container is a glorified Linux chroot jail, and what that simply means is that rather than needing all the operating system, all that kind of stuff, it's running on Linux or Windows. There are Windows containers. We're not going to talk about them because I'm not a fan of them personally. There are lots of good use cases. If you use Windows containers, more power to you. I just don't prefer them if I can get away with it. But whatever operating system is on the underneath, it's basically just a way of isolating the process and the file system, basically locking it to a particular folder. And so in Linux, the past way you use this command called chroot when you do it for a process or a service. And sort of standardizing that whole way of doing things is just basically what a container is. Everything else is just scaffolding and tools on top of that basic concept. So that's what a container is at its very base level. Is that aspect of isolating the file system and isolating the process. Everything else is just sort of terminology. So when I say a dev container, it's still a container. It's just a container that's used for development. And the way that it gets spun up is with tooling, some special tooling called the devcontainer.json file. And then if you're using VS Code, there's an extension that reads that file and makes you a container on your local machine and then boots VS Code into it. So you get this little headless VS Code that looks to you like it's on your desktop, but it's actually running in that container. If you're using a hosted service like GitHub Codespaces, they do all that work. They take that dev container JSON, they build the container in the background, they can pre-build it. So like if you have something like the PowerShell repo where it takes a good couple minutes to build the software first, you can have GitHub build that software for you and layer it in. So when somebody fires up your dev container, the software is already pre-built. So it just starts up that much faster and they're ready to contribute. So that's like the idea of a dev container. It's just a container that you're using for development. And then a runtime container is just a way to distinguish that. A runtime container is just sort of like what we classically use containers for, is that's where you take an application, you build it, you package it into a Docker file or a container file, or however you want to call it, an OCI image. And then you put that on, first you publish that to a repository, which is sort of like the PowerShell gallery for Docker images or OCI images or whatever. Like I said, Docker is just so ingrained in my head, even though they can be both. You publish those to a repository, and then you can download those just like you download modules and then run them. And things like Kubernetes and such just simply are these instructions called Helm charts or Docker compose files or whatever you want to call that say, I want a container that runs a SQL server, a container that runs this PowerShell script that I wrote, a container that runs this C# application that is an ASP.NET website, a sidecar container that watches that and reports telemetry. And if our load gets above 300 people simultaneous, make another one. And if it gets above 600, make 3 of them and load balance all that out. This is just a way of illustrating is that they're just coordinating and handling the process of starting up these virtual machines, just as if you were just a normal person, watching your load on a VMware server, like, oh, we need another virtual machine and I need to manually add it to the load balancer and all that stuff, except we can do all that automatically and have it all just done intelligently. And that's how some of the biggest websites in the world run, is that they have all that technology and they used to be doing it with virtual machines and it's painful and cumbersome. And containers enable them to be much more flexible and much more portable. You hear a lot about like solutions that are quote unquote cloud agnostic. And so when you hear that buzzword, usually what it means is that they're doing it in containers and they're doing it on Kubernetes, which is sort of the standard orchestrator platform. And there's all these different providers that can host Kubernetes. You can run it in a data center. You can run it in Azure. You can run it on-premise in Azure using Azure Local. You can run it in Amazon. You can run it in Google. You can run it in whatever third-party provider. It's just a standard, and we love standards. And so because it's standard, it's portable. And so that's sort of the main difference between like a dev container and a runtime container. They're all containers. It's just more about their purpose and their use and how they're instantiated more than any sort of technical difference between them.
Awesome. Yeah, I got to give a shout out to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. They do a lot of good work to make this stuff work in multiple places and things like that. So there's a lot that you can get out of dev containers, but from my understanding, it's not that hard to actually get started, right? You have like your .dev container folder, and then you have a dev container.json file. Is that sort of the basics of what you need to get started using dev containers?
You can get started, yeah, like that's how you can get started locally, and you don't even need that. Both VS Code and GitHub Code. Go to any repo. Here's what you want to do if you want to see this. And this is all free. Again, this is all free. It doesn't cost you a cent unless it's a private repo. So go to a public repo, one of your public repos. You can go to my Justin Grote ExcelFast, Justin Grote, ModuleFast, PowerShell/PowerShell. That's a bad example because it has a dev container. But I don't know. Go to one of your repos that you have for anything. Doesn't have to be PowerShell related or anything. Open it up. Go to GitHub. Go to that main page that shows the main area. And then you can do one of two things. You can just hit comma on your keyboard, not period, which you may have heard about. Comma is different for reasons we can talk about. But just for now, just hit comma. Or there's a button that says code, a big green button, and click that. And in the middle will be a tab for code spaces. And then you get a plus. That's a little bit more convoluted. But really, in the end, if you want to get started, the easiest way, open any repository on GitHub. You don't even have to own it, and hit comma. And what will happen is that you'll start up GitHub code spaces, which will start up the environment, start this thing called the Universal Dev Container, which is a dev container that GitHub has developed, which is sort of a kitchen sink dev container. It's got Python in there. It's got PowerShell. I can't remember if it has PowerShell in there. I'm pretty sure it does. But it's got a version of .NET. It's just a kitchen sink giant dev container. But because they built it, they have it pre-cached, so it doesn't have to load the whole thing. And then it'll open up, and you'll have VS Code. If you have VS Code installed locally, it'll open in your local VS Code. If you don't have VS Code installed, it'll open in your web browser. You can do this on an iPad. If you do the same click thing, you can do it anywhere that's a web browser that supports standard web browser stuff. You now have a development environment, a Chromebook. You now have this development environment that you can now go in and work. That's a dev container. Now, at that point, you have that. You can work in it, great, and you have it. If you want to go further, then it's customizing that dev container, making it leaner, using a different base version. Maybe you want it to be a different operating system or a different Linux distribution. Maybe you want to include some additional features, or you want it to always be up to date with the latest PowerShell. That's where the customization part comes in, and then that's where the dev container file comes in. So to get started with all that, once you've done that, if you just Google, dev containers starting, there's an article on VS Code that is like developing in containers or something like that, and it just walks you through it step by step. It's not PowerShell specific, but the same lessons apply whether it's PowerShell or anything else you want to develop.
It's pretty slick. And I think that these are tools where it's like, I love how PowerShell is a launching pad for so many ancillary technologies that look great on the resume, that make you feel like you're using really fresh tech, which you are. These tools that we have are quite nice. It's just such a great launching pad for so many things, and it can open up so many new doors and increase what you can do at work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I use them for, I've been developing modules. I use dev containers a lot because they help standardize things. I'm in the process of contributing a dev container to the PowerShell repo, so that, a big complaint of the PowerShell repo is like, if you want to add something new to PowerShell that's not just docs, like if you actually want to try to contribute code, getting started is really difficult, because you have to know how to install .NET, you have to know how to install a certain version of .NET, you have to understand the build scripts, because PowerShell has its own special build scripts, and so you have to read the development documentation about how those build scripts work. And they don't always work. They sometimes have little quirks to them that if you're doing it on Windows versus Linux or whatever, there's certain things you got to learn there. There's 3 different documents just for if you're building on Windows versus Linux versus Mac OS. So I made a dev container. It's in the pull request. It's being reviewed. That will make it so that you can go to the PowerShell repository, hit comma, and then wait a few seconds, and you have the whole PowerShell repo ready to go. You can hit Control-Shift-B, which is the default build command in VS Code, and it will build PowerShell. And congratulations, you have your custom version of PowerShell ready to go. And you can hit run and hit debug, and the debug is all pre-set up for you. You don't have to learn, you have to go through all the painful lessons I had to go through to learn how to do that in VS Code with PowerShell, and you can do it. And if you want to change an error message, or you want to start with just changing an error message because you don't think it's clean enough, you can just go in there, change it, and then run it, and build it, and then run it, and see if it worked. And if it does, make it a pull request. You can do that inside the tool there. You don't even have to go out to GitHub. You can literally say, like, make a pull request of this branch, and then it'll get reviewed, and then you can go through that process that is can be rigorous, but is importantly rigorous because PowerShell is so broadly used and has such an emphasis on compatibility and stability. But it still helps you get started faster. And imagine applying that model to things that you have in your own company. Imagine you are desperate to have people help work on a PowerShell script or PowerShell module that is for your service desk. And you have a service desk guy who is interested, and he's gone to some PowerShell classes, he's read Month of Lunches, and you want to help get him started. Well, as I mentioned, like maybe your thing has a special AZ version it needs, any of that kind of stuff. Imagine if he can just go to your repo and hit comma, and he's in. And it doesn't even touch his local workstation. You have to grant him special access. You don't have to make sure he's network connected to the right thing. He's just in, and he does that. And that can live either on his workstation. He could do it on his laptop at home if you have a BYOD policy. There's the possibilities for expanding the reach of developers and making it easier for them to contribute and expand your ability, both your ability to give value to your company, expand the reach of your tools, and more importantly, because you are such a rock star that you are going to move up in your company, you will very easily be able to hand off these things you don't want to maintain anymore to other people and help bring them up. And that helps everybody. So dev containers are just another way of realizing that philosophy and enabling people within the organization, and not have artificial stopgaps of the neckbeard experts who can't be dispensed because they're the only ones who know how to do something.
1,000,000%. I think that's sort of what everyone should strive to do. Write tools that add value and get to the point when you have so many tools and so many successes underneath your belt, where the only way to scale is to share that with others, empower them to support your projects. And dev containers is a very easy way to make that a lot easier for folks, reduce the burden to entry. I want to talk about a practical case that you showed off today. I want to introduce your new module, ExcelFast, which I might say I might be the first person to ever download it. So I appreciate
I think you might be number one on the PowerShell gallery count.
Yes. But that's a new module. I think you've been working on it, teasing it for a while. It's to import, export, and modify Excel and CSV workbooks. Yeah.
So a common thing that comes up often is in my line of work, working with an MSP, is we have a lot of reporting requirements and those kind of things. And we're usually interacting with a lot of vulnerability scanners, a lot of data analysis things. Basically, we get a lot of like CSV dumps and Excel dumps and that kind of thing. And these files are getting so large that kind of current tools for doing that kind of analysis, just kind of really either can't handle it or have just various compatibility things. And for good reasons. I mean, those tools have been around for a long time and have great compatibility with a lot of things. For instance, my module does not support PowerShell 5.1. So if you want to do stuff on PowerShell 5.1, sorry, because I'm designing it to be fast. And by doing 5.1, it is technically possible, but it loses a lot of the benefits. And it's just, if there's enough demand, I will. But for right now, it just doesn't make any sense to. So it's currently supported versions of PowerShell 7 is what it's supported on. So that's 7.4 and up. So if you, what this module basically does is it utilizes some newer libraries and some newer concepts in .NET that revolve around streaming and memory utilization to be able to read files really, really quickly. So for instance, if you go to do, the commands are basically import workbook, export workbook, open workbook, and save workbook. Those are sort of the 4 base commands currently. So what import workbook does is that you can take any Excel or CSV file, and it will go through and it will read that file. Excel files are basically glorified zip files. And if you don't believe me, take any .xlsx file you have, rename it to .zip and open it. And you'll see it's just a big zip full of Excel files. That's more or less a standard called the Open Office format. That has sort of been, it's sort of had sort of an embracey, extendy kind of thing to it where they're not directly compatible, but it's more or less, that's basically where the concept comes from. So basically, whatever Excel you're doing these days is just a giant glorified Excel file. So what this tool does, using the help of a library called Mini Excel, which is optimized for this purpose, been written in C#, written to be very, very efficient and performant, where it will basically open that zip file and then sit and wait for you to start reading the file, and then we'll start pulling the rows out as you read it. But it does this in such a really efficient way that it's able to do it, for one, it's able to do it in a streaming method, so it keeps the memory usage down, because it doesn't have to read, if you have a 1,000,000-line Excel file, if you open it up, it doesn't have to read all that into memory, which you might not even have enough memory to read whatever gigantic export dump comes from. Like, vulnerability assessments are our biggest thing here. Like, we have all kinds of products that are dumping out vulnerability assessments of environments that have, 70,000 lines, or log files, or any of those, or log files that are in a CSV format, a structured log format. These huge, huge files that you probably can't even keep in memory. So what this does is it enables streaming, is that using the power of the PowerShell pipeline, as each line comes in, it then works its way all the way down whatever your pipeline is. So if you do pipe select, or you do for each, or whatever to manipulate that data, it only reads what it needs to then complete that pipeline and move on to the next thing. And if you use like for each parallel or something like that, it's fully compatible with those too. So you can fan out those lines coming in. But it acts in what programming is known as a producer, where it's just sitting there waiting to give you things. For those of you who are .NET heads, it's an IEnumerable, which means it's that it uses an interface, a standard interface that says, I am something that you can enumerate. I am something that you can ask to move to the next thing, then move to the next thing, then move to the next thing. This happens all the time in PowerShell. You just never see it. This all happens at the .NET level below what you most of the time need to know about. But what that does is that now makes it so that when you go to read an Excel file, one, it reads really, really fast because of the way that this is optimized for memory, minimizes allocations, basically works at the chip and memory level to only go back and forth as much as it has to. It's very, very fast. And so, for instance, reading a 1,000,000-line file, it can do it in about 12 seconds on my machine. And I haven't even fully optimized it for the better ways that it can do it. But the really nice thing is, because it uses that streaming model, where it only reads as you do it. If you have a pipeline, a PowerShell pipeline, and say you do like select first 5, then that pipeline is going to read 1, read 2, read 3, read 4, read 5. But then when it gets to that one, it's going to then stop the pipeline, and then the reader will stop at that point too. So rather than read the whole file to just get 5 lines out of it, we're only reading the parts of the file to get those first 5 lines. So to do that on that same 1,000,000-line file only takes like a couple milliseconds, whereas most solutions will read the whole file in and then let you get those individual items out of it. So that same command might take a half hour to an hour when you only just want the first 5 lines of the file. So that's one optimization that's been made. The export has also been optimized so that it exports in a similar way, so that the export comes out as what's known as a stream, and that allows you to pull individual items out of the export if you need to. But that export also allows you to use any PowerShell object. So if you do git process pipe export, as you might know with other commands, if you git process pipe export workbook, then it will just take whatever that PowerShell object is, do some intelligent stuff to turn it into a table, and then export it. But my solution exports as tables by default, because I think tables are so powerful in Excel. If you've never used them, you may have used autofilter, but in Excel, the table is basically a mini database. And you can do pivot tables on them. You can sort, you can filter, you can do all kinds of stuff. And to me, tables are what all data in Excel should be in, unless it's unstructured for some reason, like unless you're doing fancy formatting for somebody's taxes so that they can see it nice, Unless you're doing sort of like weird UI stuff in Excel. to me, a data-driven Excel, everything should be done in tables. And so mine exports it as a table by default so that you don't even have to think about it. But there's the options to export it as raw as well. So that's sort of the core of the Excel part. And then I also have another function that's for opening Excel files and manipulating them so that you can take an existing Excel file, add stuff, remove it, change fonts, do all that kind of stuff. That's the other part of it. But that's sort of the summary of what that module is for.
Sweet. And we learned about runtime containers. We learned about ExcelFast. And you developed ExcelFast with runtime containers, which now that I know about runtime containers, it's not actually as fancy and over the top. It just essentially sounds like you have defined the JSON that has the environment that you expect to develop in, and you've kind of made it part of the project. You've always developed in that. If anyone else joins along, they can have access to that same exact environment to develop in. And so whenever they're creating things, you don't have to go through that whole setup. Is that a pretty fair way of explaining what the dev container does in your project?
Yeah, you said runtime container earlier. So again, it's just a semantic term, but yeah, that is a dev container. So in my case, ExcelFast has been built from day one using dev containers. I made a new folder. I said, I chose the option, reload this in a named volume, which is just a fancy thing for if you use WSL, you get better performance. I'm developing on Windows, I'm using Podman, which is a container runtime like Docker. In fact, the command line works. You can even set it up so that it aliases it, so every Docker command you do actually does it in Podman on the back end. But basically, I really like Podman. I like the architecture of it. But I use Podman to run my dev containers on Windows. And there's a new VS Code extension by the Microsoft team called Containers. That's different than there's the Docker extension, and now there's the Containers extension, which is basically just the Docker extension, but modified so that it supports all these other container runtimes too. So if you're currently using Docker extension, check out the new one. It's very new. It's only been out a couple months, but it's fantastic. And so I use those to run my dev containers locally as well as in code spaces. But yeah, so it's been developed from day one to use those. And so if you go to ExcelFast and you hit comma, you get my development environment. You get exactly minus my VS Code customizations, the little UI things that I like having the bar on the right and having the thing on the top and all the little tunes and tweaks that I talked about. You get your customizations unless I've dictated them to you as part of the dev container. Like there's a couple ones that I set, like your PowerShell is here because obviously it's in the dev container. So there's a couple settings I dictate to you, but other than that, it looks how you're used to it. But otherwise, the environment is the exact same. And now you're able to go in, and if you want to add a feature to ExcelFast, you can go in there, try it, run the pester test, add new pester tests. And if it looks good, you can use it inside that container to issue a pull request. And I'll see it, and I'll maybe review it if I have time, and I'll maybe make you wait 6 months because I'm lazy, and then I'll finally merge it. And congratulations, you're a contributor to ExcelFast. Unfortunately, that's the reality of open source development, but it's still really cool,
It is. And honestly, I feel like I have a good handle on it now. That was kind of a concept. I've heard people talk about it. I kind of got it. I know what Docker is. I've used that quite a bit. But now it sounds like I kind of need to update my projects with a little bit of this. Find an excuse to implement this because it really isn't as complicated as it may seem.
And even if you don't have external contributors, they're very useful to you also, because I rebuilt my computer recently and everything's gone. I just clean wiped it, glassed it from orbit and started over. So all my customizations tuned whatever .NET, it's like, oh crap, what did I have there? I continued working on ExcelFast just like I always did. I just re-downloaded the container, restart, and it's still there. So you can come back to a project a year later when you're not even running the same operating system and trying to figure out what the versions were to get it working on your local system, or you can just go back to that old same dev container and it'll work and you'll be able to develop for that thing. So especially applications that might have sort of esoteric requirements, they're so good to have this stable, portable environment to develop in, even if everything around them changes.
Love that. Now, I want to talk, you mentioned open source, and I know you've been busy lately with the open source contributions, I think a lot on the PowerShell repo. Can you give me some insight into what you've been working on, what you've been kind of spending your efforts on?
Yeah, I have a couple things that when I have spare time to work on, just sort of my side hobby. I've made I made a change to actual PowerShell in 7.6 that I'm hoping that I've made it so that for invoke REST method and invoke web request, if you've ever used those and use the dash verbose and the dash debug, they're not very helpful. They let you know something happened, but they don't help you troubleshoot. Like if you're working with an API to realize, oh, you made a typo, or oh, you're missing this header, or oh, this header has an uppercase there, but it needs a lowercase there. Like all those little subtle things that make working with APIs maddening, that most people go out to Postman or they go out to other tools to then test, reproduce, and then try to figure out how to do that in PowerShell to make it work. So what I did is I modified it so that the verbose and debug logging in the invoke rest method commands actually show you all the detail that you need. So by default, if you dash verbose, you still get a one-line, relatively non-sensitive explanation of what your program's doing. So the idea is that, like, say you have a whole bunch of invoke rest method calls. Say you're doing like graph API, but you're one of those super smart people who says, I don't need that graph module. I can do it all with REST API calls. And you're doing it that way. And you're using invoke rest method underneath. Well, if you have a bunch of different things that are chained together, like you're getting something, modifying it, and then putting it back, then if you do in verbose and you run your script, then you just get these nice little lines that say get URL with this size request, put with this body of type JSON, and then, so basically it's an easy, quick summary of what's happening, just sort of like when you look at the network view in DevTools, if you've ever used Chrome DevTools. Like, that's kind of what I modeled my inspiration on, just these easy one-liners that let you get a good idea of what's going on so you can quickly pick out problems. And if there's an error, see like the 403 or whatever. Then if you need more information, it's like, okay, I know my problem's here and I need to see more. Then you can add -debug, or even better, just change your debug preferences so you don't have to modify your script at all. Just change your debug preference to continue. And now you will see the full body of your request, the headers, all the sensitive stuff, your API keys, whatever. So the idea is that basically you use -verbose for any kind of logging you need to do, and it's non-sensitive. It doesn't even include query parameters. But if you use -debug, you're basically agreeing that I want to see everything, including potentially sensitive stuff, because I need to debug this. And so when you do -debug, now you see everything. You can see the if you're doing like a graph call, you can see the authorization header and your token. And then you can take that token and throw it into jwt.ms or anything to like look at it and be like, oh, I forgot a scope, or oh, this is for the wrong resource target. Or look at the body of your request and say, oh, I typed ResTource instead of resource. There's a stupid typo in there. Fix that. Just make it so much easier to get information about what's going on directly in your script without having to drop out to a tool like Podman or something like that. So I made a contribution to that. There's a basic version of it, and I'm hoping that the more robust version is basically done, and we're just fixing some tests. And I'm hoping to be able to get that in before the next preview release. So that should be available in the next 7.6 preview release, that you'll be able to just do invoke rest method, -verbose, -debug, and see a lot more information than you used to. So that's one thing I've been working on. There's still the rename support in the VS Code PowerShell that I'm hoping to get done. I would like to get it done before PSConf EU, but I don't think it's going to happen. But that's something that is still being worked on. Little things here and there, lots of little side things there. And I've also made a dev container for the PowerShell repo itself, which I think I talked about here a little bit earlier. Which I would love to have that, because I use my own custom dev container. A little side note is that the dev container doesn't have to be committed to the repo. There is a way to make dev containers that live in basically your settings JSON, your user data directory. So if you're working with a repo that doesn't have a dev container, you can define one for yourself and have your own dev container for that purchase and have it follow you wherever your VS Code settings syncs go. So that was something that was recently added, not super recently, like in the last 2 years, but it was always a huge annoyance. It's like, if I wanted to use a dev container, I had to convince the maintainer to put a dev container JSON in there. And now you don't. So like, don't let the fact that a repo doesn't have a dev container JSON stop you from making one, because you can do it. When you go to create it, you just have the option to say, do it in a user data directory. And so, yeah, there's documentation on that, et cetera. But little side thing on dev containers that you can do.
Ooh, that's exciting.
It's a lot. I know. It's hard for me with these presentations because there's so much great stuff there, and it's hard to distill into just like an hour. But it's I'm really excited about it. It's changed how I do development, along with Copilot and all the power that's there. And so I'm really happy with it. And happy to share information about it, because it's one of those things that, honestly, that you see a lot of uptick in like the more quote unquote hardcore development circles, especially with larger projects. But I think what gets missing is how good they are for just little itty bitty projects. Yeah,
that's what I'm seeing. And I think it's a really good use of the podcast to let people know that they should be getting into it. If you're out there listening, you're wondering, start dabbling. These are tools that you should be adding to your tool belt. They may seem daunting. Check out the PowerShell Wednesday. They're actually not. Like, when you break it down, it's just like Git. It's just like VS Code. You just got to get started. And then all of a sudden you have a template that you feel comfortable with. You can go on. You can borrow from, check out ExcelFast. You can check out what Justin has there. You can learn from other projects and take it with you.
Yep. take a lunch break, grab your coffee, and in a half hour, go to any repo on GitHub, anyone, you don't care, and hit comma, and then just start playing around and seeing, open a terminal, try committing something, just start playing around. Like that's the best way to start and sort of start getting the feel of like what this really can do for you.
Which brings me up a question, because you do a lot for the community. You are one of those handful of people who I think goes really above and beyond. It's like a 10x kind of thing where your ability to contribute code and to share your knowledge is just kind of on a next level. What motivates you to keep sharing your knowledge and building tools in the PowerShell community?
There's a few different things. A lot of people like to say, people talk about like test-driven development. Some people say that I'm powered by spike-driven development. I get frustrated that there's something that doesn't exist, or I get frustrated that something is not good enough, and that motivates me to make something better or make something. Again, the invoke rest method thing has bothered me for years, ever since version 6, because 5.1 still shows the URL. 5.6, a decision was made that that's too much security stuff. And just since then, nobody's bothered to relook at it. And it's driven me crazy for years that I've finally gotten to the point that like, no, I'm fixing this. It's like, it's kind of goes to, it's sort of almost me with like my cleaning style. It's like, I'll have rooms that'll just get dirty and dusty and my partner hates it. And she's like, wait, can't you just keep this clean? I can't, I just can't. But for me, like when I was living alone and when I am anywhere that I have, like it'll eventually reach a point of clutter where I'm just like, I can't take this anymore. And I'll clean it up, and fix it up and get it all good. But I almost take that approach to almost everything, and that includes development. But beyond that, I mean, it comes down to like, it's nice to see people use things that I make. Like that's a great warm, fuzzy feeling. It's nice to share knowledge and enable people. But I mean, I honestly would be lying if I didn't say that a lot of it is just driven by what I find interesting and what I want to work on. Like there's a problem I want to solve. There's a technology I want to work on. But like, to me, like, yeah, I'm flashy with my presentations and that kind of thing, but a lot of my stuff, gets thrown away or it has, but there's other people who maintain it, like the long-term stuff. And it's the stuff like DBA tools where those guys, just that wonderful crew just working on that stuff day in, day out, whether it's boring, whether it's not, they make sure that's stable. There's a whole bunch of people who rely on them. And, those are to me, like the real contributors to the community that don't get as much, credit as I do because they're not as visible. I happen to be more visible because I do more presentations, but there's those guys. I mean, the one person I really want to call out is like in the PowerShell repository, like Ilya Sazonov, who's one of the PowerShell maintainers. That guy, pretty much any pull request that goes out there, and ones that I have, you'll see is that we've gone back and forth 100 times, tuning and tweaking little things here. This should be better there. This should be better there. And he's right. It might frustrate the heck out of me because I just want to get it done, but he's right. And he's the one who's having to deal with that aspect and deal with my frustration. But he's ultimately right. It's him who is going to make sure that that's a long-term supported thing. And he's just, he's a contributor on the repo, and he's not, again, they are, I should say, I don't know his particular preference, but that's those are the people that are the unsung heroes. It's that XKCD diagram that everybody's seen of like all internet infrastructure and the one library that some guy in Nebraska has been thanklessly maintaining since 2006. Like there's plenty of those in the PowerShell community too. So that said, though, I mean, like I'm driven by the stuff that I find interesting. We talk about nerd sniping a lot, where people will say something can't be done, and I'll be like, again, with that spike-driven thing, I'm like, don't tell me it can't be done. And there was at Summit, for those of you who went to Summit, there were lightning demos, and there was just a thing where, as a fun, lighthearted joke, and I know that I was able to talk to him later about it. It was great. So Don Jones said something in one of his presentations about the filter keyword, that it was an afterthought, and I did a whole lightning demo defending it just as a fun joke. And so, but it's stuff like that. It's like don't tell, if I have an opinion on something, I'm going to express it either by expressing my opinion or making something that demonstrates that opinion. And my opinion is that there are a lot of advantages to Copilot and such like that, and there are a lot of advantages to dev containers. And so I'm going to demonstrate how those help, because they help me.
Yep. I think that's important to understand what makes you tick and figuring out how you can drive that in a way that can help the community, which ultimately helps you grow, helps you teach others, help you have more job security, more connections. And for me, a big thing is like feeling like you belong, feeling like you're adding value. And that doesn't have to look the same for everybody. It can look different for many. And definitely shout out the unsung heroes out there who are plugging away, doing things, not getting all the recognition that they deserve. We wouldn't, that's what is so cool to me. It's just a community. There's so many of us. If it was just one or two, it would not be the same. It's not just one or two people. It's all of us together contributing on these things. All the small projects that maybe only help out 1,000 people or even less, all of it comes together to make this really great experience that we get to live. I live in the PowerShell world. It's an awesome thing. And I want to ask you another question, but first I want to tell people, hey, thank you for listening. This is the PowerShell Podcast. Every single Monday we're here. And if you liked what Justin said, check out the PowerShell Wednesday recording. It will probably be on YouTube by the time this episode goes live. And join us live every single Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. We have not missed a Wednesday yet. We're there every single week learning new things, a lot of beginner content, a lot of advanced content as well. We are here to meet you wherever you are in that journey. If you're digging the podcast, if you're still listening, first of all, shout out to you. You are in the right spot, learning the right things. If you're newer to your journey, keep with it. One step at a time, you'll find your next step. And, leave us a review, leave us a like, comment, subscribe. Check out Apple Podcasts, leave us a review there, all the good things. But Justin, I got to put it back on you here, man. And actually I have two questions, but what are your 3 favorite modules right now? And you are completely allowed to shill your own stuff.
Oh, yeah. So, ExcelFast, I'm really happy with. ModuleFast, I always plug because as I showed in my demo with PowerShell Wednesday, I used ModuleFast to build the PowerShell runtime containers. And I use it in ExcelFast to instantiate the dependencies for my dev container. And so I love ModuleFast. I'm very happy with it. And I use its utility. ExcelFast, I'm really excited about. It's already saved me a lot of time in importing certain things that I wasn't able to do before. I'm excited about the possibilities. I'm trying to think, as far as a third, nothing's coming to mind. Those are the 2 that are really top of mind right now. I think I've talked about it before, but Jordan Borean's Secret Management DP API NG. That's a mouthful and it's a terrible name and I've made fun of him for it. But it's the best secret management vault out there, in my opinion, mine included. What DP API NG is this the DP API, which you may recognize. That's basically the Windows credential manager. Is like a fancy name for it. It's the way that you can save credentials in Windows and they get encrypted by your profile or by your domain account, so that your logging in credentials is the key for it. If you use Secret Store, those kind of things, you have to manage a separate key and take care of it. In this case, it's tied to your Windows login and it's portable to that. So what DP API NG does is use the next generation part of that interface so that you can create secrets that are portable. You can create a secret in a domain that you can assign to a group. And so anybody who's part of that group can decrypt that secret. You can pass it to them, those kind of things. So that's based on the DP API NG module, which is great. But he also added a secret management vault to it. And that's my default vault. I have that as my default secret management vault, is that when I go to create a secret, I have it in there. So my PowerShell gallery keys, I store them in there. I do that. And then they're just stored as part of my Windows profile. Now I don't have to remember some AES key to unlock. I'm just on my computer that I unlock with Windows Hello. And when I'm in, then when I need to publish something, it's literally publish PS resource and then in parentheses, secret PS gallery key. That's all I put, which is short for get secret dash name PS gallery key. And that's it. And so I do that. And then I actually take that into my profile. So that's one of my PS default parameter files. So all I do is publish PS resource ExcelFast, and that key gets pulled out of there. And I don't have to even think about it. I don't have to enter a password. I don't have to remember to enter that. I don't have to find the vault file. It's all just magic. And so that's I'm gonna definitely put that as my 3rd favorite module. Shout out to Jordan Borean. Getting back to PSConf EU, my other presentation is that we are doing a PowerShell Run Spaces deep dive. Where we're going to talk all about the inner workings and nitty gritty of run spaces, thread job, for each parallel. It's going to be I'm really looking forward to it. And that presentation, much like the presentation I did with Manuel, is going to be a follow-along presentation, which uses code spaces. If you'll be able to both either in person or later at the recording, be able to go to the repo, hit comma, and then do every single thing that we do in run spaces right there. It's a follow-along lab. So check that out if you're coming to PSConf EU. And if not, you would sadly have to wait for the recording. So you should come to PSConf EU instead.
You should definitely come say hi if you're going to be there. I made a silly little announcement video. You should check that out as well if you want a little.
It was chuckle. Great. I enjoyed it very much.
It was something. It was a sight to see. I definitely felt odd taking some of those photos at work, but is what it is. If you're not cringing, you're not growing. And there's a couple cringe moments in there, which is good. Justin, people are digging the vibes. They want to keep in touch with you. Where is the best place to find you on the World Wide Web?
I'm available on Blue Sky at Justin Grote. I have my GitHub at Justin Grote, and then also on Discord, Justin Grote across the way. I hang out in the PowerShell Discord the most. You'll usually find me in Fringe or PowerShell Help on occasion. Those are the main places. I still have an account on Twitter, but I don't check it very often. That's Justin W. Grote if you just want to go back and look at things. But yeah, GitHub, Blue Sky, and Discord are where you can find me for the most.
Awesome. Well, Justin, thank you for joining me. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. If you're walking, if you're driving, whatever you're doing, be safe. Enjoy the ride. Take notes. Check out the show notes. Check out the PS Podcast module to look at mini episodes show notes. It's a cool new module by Jeff Hicks that looks quite fancy. And just have a great day. We'll see you in the community. Find your next step, do your next thing, and let's just keep growing together. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the PowerShell Podcast. The PowerShell Podcast is a PDQ production, making device management simple, secure, and pretty damn quick.